vote for him too.
I didn't mean to have you all stand the whole time here, but I appreciate it. It's like a long-standing ovation kind of thing. But thank you very much. I'm grateful and honored to be part of this today. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you all for being here as well. And I'm sorry my back is to you, but hey, you'll be on TV tonight. So we're going to do questions today, so we're going to get into that point pretty quickly. Let me just begin on the outset. I'm going to treat this like a job interview because I'm asking you to hire me to be the President of the United States, entrusting me not just with your homeland, but the greatest and most important country in the history of the world. So it's important to say, you want to be president, what is the presidency? Well, the presidency, by the way, is not just the head of government, it's the head of state. It's someone who represents our country and in many ways sets the tone for everything that's happening in America today. One of the biggest quarrels I have with our current president, I think he's been incredibly divisive. I think he's been a president that's divided us against each other, a president that has pitted us, American versus American. And he started doing that around 2009, as soon as he took over. But I mean, and to the point where I think it's been very damaging to this country. It is my hope of elected president, when elected president, to try to unite this country as much as possible. That does not mean everyone's going to agree with me on everything. It does mean I will never ask you to be angry at another group of Americans in order to win an election. I will never do that. And that's very important. There are two areas that a president deals with. The first is our agenda here at home. And let me begin by saying, anytime a politician comes to you and tells you they created millions of jobs when they were governor or something like that, you should be concerned. Because they're either not telling you the truth or they grew government by millions of jobs. Because government doesn't create jobs other than government jobs. That's what the other party believes. That's what Democrats believe. That's what liberals believe. To be a conservative is to understand that the jobs we want to create are created in the private sector. That's what the jobs are created. So I hear people talk about the presidency as how many jobs are going to create. That's not your job. That's the job of the private sector. The job of a president, the job of a senator, the job of those of us in public service is to put in place policies that allow the private sector to succeed. And that's why this has been such a bad presidency. Because the policies he's putting in place are policies that make it harder for the private sector to succeed. Look at South Carolina. You are a state that is leading the country in things like manufacturing. Manufacturing is leaving America, but it's growing here. Why? It wasn't because you raised taxes, because you did the opposite. It wasn't because you increased regulations, because you did the opposite. We need to look at what South Carolina has done to attract companies like BMW and Michelin and others, how it's been able to expand not just in manufacturing, but in trade, as an example of the kind of policies we need to put in place from the federal level. And I have an agenda that does that. That's why I have a clear agenda on reforming the tax code, on rolling back regulations, on dealing with the national debt, and by the way, as part of that, on saving Social Security and Medicare. I care deeply about Social Security and Medicare because I'm from Florida. A lot of people don't know this. There are a lot of people in Florida on Social Security and Medicare. And you know who one of them is? My mother. She's 85 years old. And I am against any changes that are bad for my mother. I think that's a good position, right? And here's that we can save Social Security and Medicare without disrupting a thing for her or anyone who's on it or anyone who's about to retire. It's going to have to look a little different for me. I'll be 45 in May. After this week, I feel 55. But the point is that it'll work a little different for me. It'll be better than anything else in the world, and we can talk about that today. The job of the president is to put in place domestic policies that allow the private sector to succeed, but you have to do that by working with Congress. This notion that I hear from some people, when I was governor, or when I was mayor, when I was whatever, I did this or I did that. No, you didn't. You did that in conjunction with the legislative branch. You had to work with people who passed laws to vote that in. And I can tell you that I have as much experience, if not more, than anyone running for president on getting things done through the legislative branch. I did it in Florida for 8.5 years in the state legislature, and I've done it in Washington, D.C. And I look forward to doing it as president. Because the problem we have with our current president is he doesn't want to work with the legislative branch. We have a constitutional system of government that divides power. And we have a president that has ignored that. And what does he do instead? His pen and his phone. Executive orders. I will follow the Constitution and respect the Constitution. And that means I will work with members of Congress, quite frankly, on some issues in both parties, to deal with our domestic issues and put in place policies. I've done it before. I'll do it again as President of the United States. Here is the job the president must do: keep America safe. And that means having a president that understands the threats that we face. I say this to you now without a bit of hesitation. There is no one left in the Republican field who has more experience or has proven to have better judgment on national security than I have. Over the last 5 years, Donald Trump has zero foreign policy experience. Negotiating a hotel deal in another country is not foreign policy experience. Jeb Bush has no foreign policy experience, period. And I'm an incredible admirer of him and of his family. I thank God that George W. Bush was President of the United States instead of Al Gore on September 11th. But Governor Bush has no foreign policy experience. Ted Cruz has a little bit of foreign policy experience, and it's different than mine. Ted Cruz, the only budget he's ever voted for in his years in Washington was a budget sponsored by Rand Paul that bragged about cutting defense spending. When I'm president, we're not cutting defense spending. We are rebuilding the United States. I can tell you today unequivocally that there are things we do not know about ISIS, and there are things we do not know about terrorists because of what Edward Snowden did to this country. Ted Cruz said Edward Snowden was a great public servant. I say Edward Snowden is a traitor, and if we ever get a hold of him, he will stand trial. There are differences, and I have worked on this issue because I believe it is the most important thing the federal government does is keep us safe. I've served 5 years now on the Intelligence Committee, which means that we work every single day looking at the threats to America. I've served for 5 years now on the Foreign Relations Committee, including the chairman of Committee on the Western Hemisphere, an issue that isn't talked about nearly enough. I'm proud. Look, about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, we unanimously passed in the U.S. Senate sanctions on Hezbollah. Hezbollah is one of the worst terror organizations in the world. They are a proxy army of Iran. They are well-funded. When all those rockets come flying in on Israel, it's Hezbollah that's doing that. Today, they will have less money, and people that are trying to fund them will have it harder to get them money because of the work I did in a bipartisan way to impose sanctions on Hezbollah, and we just passed that a few weeks ago. We can talk about the other things we've done, but from Libya to Iraq to Syria, time and again, before some of the things that are happening now happened, I warned about them 2.5 or 3 years ago. The next president of the United States is going to inherit a country and a world that is heading in a very dangerous direction. A lunatic in North Korea with nuclear weapons. Just yesterday in the Senate, we passed sanctions on North Korea that included key components that I put into that law that will deny North Korea access to raw minerals like aluminum, which is critical to developing the long-range rockets that they need. I guess my point is, national security is the single greatest obligation of the commander-in-chief. When I'm president, we are going to rebuild the U.S. military. We're going to have a real war on terror. Not a fake war on terror, a real one. Best intelligence agencies in the world will find where the terrorists are. And then the strongest military on the planet will destroy them. But if we capture any of these people alive, because we don't do that anymore, we need to capture some of them alive so we can gather intelligence. If we capture them alive, we're not going to treat them like a burglar. We're not going to treat them like a shoplifter. They're not going to get Miranda rights or a lawyer or a court hearing in Manhattan. They're going to Guantanamo. So 2016, I've been saying this now since the beginning of my campaign. 2016 is going to be a turning point. What kind of turning point is what you get to decide here in South Carolina a week from Saturday. Because there are only two ways forward. The road we're on right now is the road to decline. If the next president of the United States is someone not committed to undoing the damage Barack Obama has done, we're going to decline. If the next president of the United States is someone who agrees with Barack Obama, like Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, we're going to decline. Bernie Sanders is an avowed democratic socialist. Actually, if you met him, you'd be like, nice guy. But he's a socialist. We don't want to be a socialist country. If you want to be a socialist country, I have a list back at the hotel room of 68 countries that have socialism. You should move there. We want to be American. Hillary Clinton's disqualified from being president of the United States. Hillary Clinton took sensitive intelligence information and put it on her private server. Let me tell you, I went back to Washington yesterday for a few hours to vote on North Korea sanctions and then to do my intelligence work. If I would have taken those memos out of the folder, if I would have taken that information out of my office and walked out of the building with them, with my staffer, someone would have been arrested and someone would have been fired for that. But she put it on her server. She thinks she's above the law. She's not above the law. She thinks she's above the law, and she's not. But I'm going to tell you another reason why she's disqualified. She knew that what happened in Benghazi was a terror attack. She knew it. Right at the beginning, she knew it. And then she was talking to foreign leaders. She was emailing them with her own family, and she was telling them the truth. This is a terror attack. People don't bring rocket grenade launchers to a street protest. It was a terror attack. She knew it from the beginning. But you know what she told the families of the people who died in Benghazi? This was all because of some weird movie that they made somewhere. That's why this happened. She lied to them. If you lie to the families of people who have lost their lives in the service of this country, you are disqualified from being the commander of the country. So we must win this election. We can get into any issue you want here today, but we have to win this election. And that's why I hope I can earn your support. I'm asking for your vote. Because I'm as conservative as anyone in this race. But I'm a conservative that can grow this movement. I won't just unite this party, I will grow it. First we have to unite it. We can't win if all we do is beat up on each other. The Democrats love that stuff. When they hear us talking bad about each other on the debate stage, going at each other's throat, they love it. We just save them millions of dollars in commercials. They love it. So we've got to come together. I'm the only one left in this race that can quickly unite this party. But that alone is not enough. We have to grow it. We have to take our message to people that haven't voted for us in a long time. In essence, we have to take our message to people who are living the way I grew up. My parents were not wealthy people. They were hardworking people. They worked every day. They worked for hourly wages their entire life, well into their 70s. I lived paycheck to paycheck, both growing up and in our early years of our marriage. We have to take the Republican conservative message to people that are not rich, to people that have not made a lot of money, because that's the backbone of our country. Every country has rich people. There's nothing wrong with being rich. We should celebrate wealth and success. But the backbone of our country are people that work for a living and are not rich. They just want to be happy. They just want to do what my parents were able to do. And that is own a home and retire with dignity and live to see all of their kids have a better life than their own. We have to take our message to young Americans, some of whom now owe thousands of dollars in student loan debt that they took out to pay for a degree that didn't even lead to a job. So you borrow thousands of dollars to go to college, you graduate, and then the only job you could find, you could have had anyway. So for example, that's why I've said, we need to have more welders and less philosophers. And I think it hurt me because in New Hampshire, I came within a couple thousand votes of being in third place, and now I found out there's like 2,000 philosophers in New Hampshire. So I know the media, that's a joke. I'm not sure it's 2,000. It might be 3,000. I don't know. But the point is, there's nothing like a philosopher who can weld. I can tell you that. We need more vocational training. And we need alternatives to student loans. We cannot continue to be a country where people are borrowing $50,000 to graduate with a degree for a job that pays $40,000 a year. Because you'll never pay off the loan. I had a student loan. I know how hard it is to pay these things off. We're going to take our message to them. We're going to take our message to people raising children, young families. My tax plan is a pro-family tax plan. But I'm going to tell you, in addition to financial struggles, young families raising children, you know what the biggest trick is? I'm doing it right now. I have 4 kids. I wish they were here this morning, but it's a little early for them. Well, they have to do their schoolwork. They're on the road with us. And working to ensure that these kids grow up with the values we want to teach them is harder than ever. Because when the TV is on. You can't even trust Disney Channel anymore. The TV is on. I don't know what they're going to say to them, but it undermines what we teach them. Even in our political culture, I teach my kids to be respectful. There are certain words you don't say. No matter what setting you're in, act with dignity and hold yourself up. And then you turn on the TV, you have a leading presidential candidate saying profanity from a stage. Profanity from a stage. All these things undermine what we teach our children. Not to mention the movies, the music, and everything else. So it's just so hard today to instill your values in your kids, particularly the values that they teach in our church. The values that pride is not good. Humility is important. That all of us are sinners and fall short of the glory of God. That every single one of us is in need of salvation. These are important values we try to instill in them in a society that teaches all the opposite. In a society that teaches glorify yourself. We're going to take our values to families as well. In closing, we have a lot of challenges. America's headed in the wrong direction in a big-time way, and it is moving there fast. I believe if the next 4 years are anything like the last 7, we're in a lot of trouble. In fact, I believe if the next 4 years are anything like the last 7, I'm going to have to explain to my kids why I inherited the greatest country in the history of the world, and they did not. Why I got to grow up in an America that was exceptional, and they inherited an America in decline. And that's never happened. In over 2 centuries, we've never had a generation of Americans leave the next worse off. But that's what we're about to do, unless we get this election right. If we get this election right, I think America's going to be better than it's ever been. I think our economy, because we now have millions of people around the world to sell things to, has a chance to be more prosperous than ever. I think the American dream has a chance not just to survive, I think we can expand it so that it can reach more people than ever. I think America on the global stage can be stronger than it's ever been. I think our freedoms can be more secure than they've ever been. I honestly and truly and fully believe that our greatest day, our greatest era is right before us, but only if we act now. We have to do it. We will. You nominate me, we win this election, and the Democrats know it. They know it. In poll after poll, I consistently beat Hillary Clinton. I'm the only Republican that does. That's why they spend more time attacking me than anyone else. Because they know that if I'm our nominee, we win. So I'm here today to earn your vote. I want you to vote for me so that I can be our nominee. We can win this election. We can turn America around, and we can leave for our children and your grandchildren and children what they deserve. The greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you. Okay, so this gentleman in the back, just with a sign. Okay, do we have another microphone? And over there. So just find the microphone. We have plenty of time. I'm going to go see my kids in a little while for breakfast somewhere before we fly off to the other place. I don't think they need to do any social studies work these days because they've been in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. So, but here we go. Good morning.
Increase our military and also reduce our national debt?
Thank you for that question. It's very important. The military spending is not what causes our debt. Let me explain where we are, where we're going to be in less than 5 years. In less than 5 years, 83% of our entire federal budget, 83%, will be made up of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. That means only 17% of our budget in less than 5 years will be composed of the safety net programs, the military, roads and bridges, everything else. 17% of our budget will be all the things the government does, and 83% will be Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the interest on the debt. That's why we have to deal with those issues. Now here's the good news. We can save Social Security and Medicare for future generations without changing it for people that are on it now like my mom, or people that are about to retire over the next 10 years. And the changes we need to make are not outrageous. So, for example, under current law, I am supposed to retire at 67. I may have to retire at 68. If I was still in the Senate, I'd be the youngest person there, or one of the youngest people in the Senate. But that's almost true. But my point is that instead of under current law 67, I'd have to retire at 68. If I've made a lot of money, for my generation, our Social Security check would not grow as fast as it's going to grow for someone who made less money. Medicare could very well be the option of taking my Medicare money and using it to buy a private plan that I like better. Not unlike Medicare Advantage. My mom's on Medicare Advantage. It works well for her. I think it depends on where you live. Some places have better Medicare Advantage than others. For her, it's really important because she was left she had a stroke in 2011. She can't walk anymore. And they offer all kinds of, she goes into the clinic once a week because they want to keep her healthy. Both for financial reasons, but also because they care, right? And it's good for her. It works for her. My point is, these are for my generation. Why is that okay? Because, I am 20 years away from retiring, 23 years away from retiring. I have time to plan for that. If we make those changes, we don't have to change anything for people that are on it now or about to retire, other than to make it better. I think we have to make fee-for-service Medicare easier to use. It's really complicated. I have people call our office all the time. They have struggled to find how to navigate it and so forth. I think we have to stop undermining Medicare Advantage. It works really well in a lot of parts of this country. Obama's taking money out of Medicare Advantage to pay for Obamacare. If we do those things, we bring our debt growth under control. Because the way to bring the debt under control is the combination of spending reforms and economic growth. And that's where my tax and regulatory policies are going to trigger that. You do those two things, you bring the debt under control. On the military side, guys, this is the first thing we should spend money on before we spend money on anything else. That's the reason why we have a federal government. We don't need a Department of Education. Why do we have a Department of Education at the federal level? That's what school boards are supposed to do. All these welfare programs that exist today, and I believe in the safety net, okay? I think if you've hit on tough times, we need to help you get back on your feet and stand up again. But for a lot of people, it's become a lifestyle. It's become a way of life. You're never going to fix that at the federal level. You want to help people that are struggling, you got to help them find a good paying job. And you're never going to do that with a one-size-fits-all set federal program. I propose taking the anti-poverty money and giving it to states and cities and local communities and let them design programs. And the only requirement will be, if you're on welfare, you either have to be working, and we'll make up the difference for you, or you have to be going to school. But you're not going to be sitting at home watching Matlock. I just said sitting at home watching Matlock. I picked on them because they have it every other country. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there's Matlock is playing somewhere. So I like it. I'm just saying. So you do those things, you bring the debt in. But our military today is in such bad shape. Let me tell you what is happening. We are soon going to have the smallest army we've had since the end of World War II. And our Navy will soon be the smallest it's been in 100 years. And the Air Force is about to be not just smaller, but our planes older than we've ever had. We're still flying the B-52 as an example. We have so much danger in the world, and instead of building up our capacity, we're undermining it. And this weakness leads to war. It leads to violence. It leads to instability. It leads to chaos. Weakness is an enemy of peace. We must rebuild our military. And it's the first thing we should do before we pay for anything else. And we can balance our budget, deal with our debt, and still fund our military, but we have to do it now. We wait any longer, we're going to have a debt crisis.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
The last two Republican candidates we've had, to me, were both great men, but flawed candidates, especially Senator McCain. When he had the opportunity to go after Obama, I'm listening to the Reverend Wright for 20 years. I remember what his statement was, it's not proper and I just won't do it. We don't need that. We need a fighter that's going to take somebody out. You have probably her against the ropes. You have to take her out.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. So, I'm about to say something that sounds like those magicians at the shows in Vegas. We've never met before, right, sir? You ever been to one of those shows where that's a guy you staged? No. Look. So the other night at the debate, I got criticized because I said the same thing 3 times. So I'm going to say it one more time, just so. saying it. Am I telling you that he is the best manager in the history? Well, no, he's not. Look, they're incompetent. They passed Obamacare, but they didn't know how to implement it because they're incompetent. But Obamacare was not an accident. Neither was Dodd-Frank. Neither is the weakening of our military, or the deal with Iran, or the executive orders, or the all-out assault on the Second Amendment. It's all product of a broader plan. And what is the broader plan? He told us in 2008 to change America. He didn't like what America was. He wanted to change it. He wanted America to be more like the rest of the world. He thought we were an arrogant country, so let's cut America down to size. Let's weaken our military. Let's apologize to the world. He thinks, oh, we have bad relationships in the Muslim world because we're too close to Israel. So let's create some separation. Let's take Israel on a little bit because that's going to help us. Let's reset the relationship with Vladimir Putin. That's why he's the way he acts with us, because we're not nice enough to him. This is all being done on purpose. All being done on purpose. So, when you basically argue, no, he's just like me, we're just a little bit different. No, he's not. They have a very different view of the world. Look, I'll tell you right now, I think Barack Obama is a great father from everything I see and a great husband, but he's a terrible president because his view of America is very different than my view of America, and it sounds like your view of America. And yes, Hillary Clinton shares those views. She shares those views. In fact, here's the great unreported story today in the 21st century American politics. The Democratic Party has been taken over by radicals. By radicals. Where are the moderate Democrats? Where's the moderate Democrats? Where are the Scoop Jacksons? Where are the centrist Democrats? There's none left. The winner in the New Hampshire primary, and basically a coin flip away from the winner in Iowa, is a socialist who wants us to become like a Scandinavian country. I have nothing against Scandinavian countries. They're nice places. Move there. He should move to Scandinavia. We don't want to be them. We want to be America. Okay? They are a radical. They become taken over by radical elements. And I can just tell you, as someone who is as far to the right as Bernie Sanders is to the left, we're the leading Republican candidate. That story every day would be the Republican Party, an extremist party. They're the extremists. They are the extremists. And we better understand that, because if we don't, then here's the choice before the American people. Oh, there's two parties running. They're not really that different from each other. The Democrats are a little bit more liberal. The Republicans are a little bit more conservative. But the Democrats sound like they care about us. I'll just vote for the Democrat. That's why we get ourselves into trouble. There's a big difference between us and them. And what you mentioned was part of a broader problem, and that is we should have seen in 2008 that Barack Obama had views about America and America's future and the role of America in the world that were very different from what the majority of Americans believe. And the failure to point that out during that campaign has cost us over the last 8 years. But we're going to fix it now. Let's get the mic up here, too. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
In your commentary on the revenue income and what it's devoted to, I believe you said 83% is devoted to, you listed a number of things.
In 5 years, it'll be 83%, correct.
The one thing you neglected to mention was entitlements. I frankly get awfully tired of hearing about the entitlements in food stamps and rent aid to people that aren't working, but yet they have $600 iPhones. And that consumes an inordinate amount of our income, but I didn't hear any specific plans, if you have any, that might reduce that circumstance.
Yes, sir. Actually, the programs you're discussing, the safety net, I actually discussed about turning them back over to the states. I'm going to elaborate further on it. That's part of the 17%. That's not even part of the 83. That's part of the 17%. But those programs are broken. Let me tell you why. They don't cure poverty. Those programs are the equivalent to breaking your arm and going to the hospital and being given a lifetime supply of painkillers. I mean, if they did that to you, you'd say, "Aren't you going to fix my arm?" No, we're just going to numb it. So these programs help you pay your bills, but they don't cure poverty. Unless you're permanently disabled. You're permanently disabled, you can't work. That's different. But beyond that, the only cure for poverty is a good paying job. So what stands in the way of a good paying job? Well, number one is an economy that's not creating them. So we've got to put in place policies that allow the economy to create more of them. But the other is we're basically paying people not to look for those jobs. In many parts of this country, depending on what packages of service your state offers, You can make the equivalent of $8, $9 an hour to not work. Not work. And so that equation has to change. It's never going to change from the federal government. You will never design a one-size-fits-all federal approach to poverty that works. You never will. That's why I believe we've got to take all of that money that we spend on food stamps, on welfare, on all these things, and turn it over to the states and the local communities. Why? Because in the local community, you can design innovative programs that deal with poverty. So as an example, let's say that today you need $15 an hour to live. But the best you can find is a job that pays $9 an hour. I would rather give you the equivalent of $6 an hour supplement and have you go work than stay at home and collect $8 an hour and not work at all. Because if you're working, at least you're gaining experience. I don't believe there's such a thing as a dead-end job. There is no such thing as a dead-end job. Because every job you do, you're gaining experience that allows you to grow. People say, oh, a cashier at McDonald's. You know that many of the franchises in America of McDonald's are owned by people that started as a cashier at McDonald's? And so the we can't pay people to stay home, number one. Number two, if you're not going to do that, then you have to go back to school. And we'll give you a year, 18 months, 2 years, whatever they decide at the local level, fine. You can't find a job, then you're going back to school. You're going to become a car mechanic, an airplane technician, a welder, a plumber, an electrician, a pipe fitter. You are going to learn a skill that makes you employable. Because guess what? In 18 months to 2 years, or whatever the number they decide on, the benefit is up. And you better have a skill or a job, or you're stuck. We have to do that. But that's never going to happen at the federal level. Never. The federal government will never do that. It has to be. We have to give the power back to cities and states and local communities. And by the way, we have to break barriers too. We have to allow cities and states to work with non-governmental groups like churches and synagogues and charities in the community to come up with these sort of programs as well. Because we have to cure poverty. You are never going to cure poverty if you are paying people not to work. And too many of our safety net programs do that. They've become a way of life. When you put together all these packages, I am telling you, there are people that have figured it out. They have figured it out. I don't mean to deviate from your question, but I want to give you a real example that I'm dealing with in Miami right now. Okay? Many of you know I come from a Cuban background, so I can talk about Cuban Americans. Cuban Americans come to the United States with a special status because Cuba is a communist country. If you get here from Cuba, you are automatically granted permanent status. It's called the Cuban Adjustment Act. You know, Obama made all these changes with Cuba, the opening, etc. So today, it's easy to travel back and forth from Cuba. Very easy to do it. So what are we facing now? Let me tell you what we're facing. Thousands and thousands of people coming to the United States from Cuba. They immediately become residents of the U.S. within a year and a day. You become a resident of the United States. When you arrive from Cuba, you qualify for a package of refugee benefits. To the point where today, I've witnessed this firsthand, okay? I was at a checkout line at the grocery store about a year ago. The lady in front of me was a recent arrival from Cuba, filling up her basket with food stamps and all the other benefits she gets. The lady behind her was from Cuba too, but she came 40 years ago and she was livid. She goes, do you know that someone that comes from Cuba right now, they get more benefits from Social Security and refugee programs than I do for my Social Security check after having worked in this country for 35 or 40 years? People are livid. Now here's the worst part. They're coming from Cuba. They're getting all of these benefits. You know where they go? Back to Cuba. They get on an airplane, they fly back to Cuba. They open a bank account in the U.S. Our government, your tax dollars is deposited into their bank account, and then their relatives take the money out, probably take a cut, and then wire the rest of the money to their relatives in Cuba. So today, right now, there are thousands of people on the island of Cuba living off your taxpayer money. People figure out how to game this thing. Now, I just filed a law to change that. But my point is, people figure out how to game these things. There's a whole industry out there that will teach you how to game all this. We've got to stop it. It's bad. We can't afford it as a country, and we're hurting people. We are hurting people because we are trapping them in a cycle of dependency that they can't get out. That needs to end, but it will never end. Why? Because the federal government doesn't have the resources or the time to investigate all this. You assign that to a city or a county or a state, they're closer to that problem. They'll get on top of it. You allow them to work with non-governmental agencies to implement these programs, they'll figure out right away, hey, so-and-so doesn't live here anymore. We just went to their house and they're not there. The federal government's never going to do that. I don't even want to get into Medicare fraud. another thing that's shameful because a lot of it's happening in Miami. It's an outrage. People also coming from Cuba. I don't mean to beat up on Cubans, but I'm Cuban, so I can do it, right? But people coming from Cuba, they open up a clinic, they get a Medicare billing number, they steal $200,000 a month. Federal government doesn't even investigate it. Unless you get greedy and steal $1 million a month, they don't even begin to look at it. As soon as we're about to catch them, you know what they do? They got on an airplane and fly to Cuba. And they're living there with the millions of dollars they stole from you. This is happening right now, and it's an outrage. We're going to fix it.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, for coming here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My question, after 7 years with President Obama here, and there's a culture in Washington on that, and what I find there's a lot of anger, and I think the people are beginning to understand that both with Bernie Sanders and with Trump, and they didn't know how much anger is out there for the culture in Washington that has become, with the lobbyists, with the people there who want power and not service and everything else. From day one, how will you change the culture in Washington? And that is so important if we're going to move forward.
Well, I agree with you. And I think one of it is to, it's going to sound too a little bit simplistic, but I actually believe this deeply. We need to re-embrace the Constitution. The Constitution deals with this issue. The Constitution divides powers. First of all, it gives most of government's power to the states, not the federal government. So number one, we have to stop thinking that every problem in America has a federal government solution. I've done, I don't know, over close to 100 of these town halls between here, Iowa, New Hampshire, different parts of the country. And a lot of times people are well-meaning, but they say, what are you going to do about concussions in football? Well, I can't do anything about it. I mean, it's not a federal issue. And I think we need to get, number one, to a point where we have to recognize not every problem in America has a government problem. Number two, not every problem in America that has a government solution has a federal government solution. The vast majority of these issues involve local communities, states. And I have people asking me all the time, what are you going to do about improving garbage pickup in America? Not all the time, but people have asked me that. I'm going to say, well, now you got to talk to your local city commissioner. I was on a city council. If the garbage didn't get picked up on time, and it's true people knew where I lived, and they'd say, hey, you know, the garbage guy's coming too late. So that's number two. Number three, we need to understand at the federal level that our power is very limited, and that the federal government should be doing a few things, but those things it should be doing very well. The second thing we have to respect is the separation of power. The president is not the king. The president is the executive branch. The job is to execute the law. And it's damaging. The loss of that view has been damaging. Why? Because a lot of the people today, their attitude is, why are you getting in the way of the president from doing his job? Well, you have to understand the job of the president is not to pass laws. The job of the president, obviously, is to promote good policies, but ultimately it's to execute the policies that are passed by the legislative branch. And we've lost all balance on that. The perception Barack Obama is creating is that the job of the legislature is to ratify. The job of Congress is to ratify the enlightened decisions that he makes. That is not the job of the congressional branch. And we got to put the courts back in the right place too. That we have this attitude in this country, well, the Supreme Court ruled, so it must be really good. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 lawyers, 8 of whom, all of them that went to either Harvard or Yale, I think. None of whom are from South Carolina. And they're not elected. And they're there until they leave or die. Okay? That's not their job. They are not super legislators. They are not the supervisors of the republic. Their job is to apply the Constitution as originally written. Their job is not to say, well, that's how the Constitution is, but I disagree. And that's what they're doing now. But we have got to bring our republic back to its proper balance. And the third thing is, yes, you're absolutely right that there is a culture that's run away from us on influence. And I'm going to tell you why. Because big government is the playground of special interests. It's the playground of special interest. If you are a special interest, I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, conservative, or liberal. If you are a special interest, you like big government because you are able to influence government. The more control government has over something, the more people who influence government win. So big corporations like big government. Why? Because they can influence big government. They've done it in banking. Why are the big banks today bigger than they've ever been? Because of Dodd-Frank. Because Dodd-Frank creates a bunch of rules and regulations, and they're the only ones that can afford to follow the rules and regulations. They're the only ones that can afford to hire 1,000 lawyers to comply. What happens to the regional bank? What happens to the local bank? They can't do it. So they have to, what do? They merge with a big bank. Or they stop lending money. Big interests love big government. That's why if you go around the world, there are a lot of countries that call themselves capitalists. They're not. They're corporatists. In many countries around the world, it is literally the same families and the same companies who have dominated the economy decade after decade after decade. Because government dominates the economy. And they influence government, and everyone else is stuck. You can't start a business out of the spare bedroom of your home in those countries. Because you can't deal with big government. So we got to bring government into its proper role, in its proper place, and we have to limit its power, especially at the federal level. That is what's driving the culture. If government doesn't have the power over these safety net programs, because we've given it to states, you can hire all the lobbyists in the world you want to come to Washington, D.C. It won't matter. The power's not there. The power's at the local level. The power's at the state level. And I'm not saying there isn't special interest there as well, but you have more influence there. You don't like what your city commissioner's doing. You don't like what your city council's doing. You don't like what your school board's doing. You don't like what your state legislator's doing. You know where they live. Go try to find a bureaucrat at the Department of Education to complain about schools. You won't even get anyone to pick up the phone. So we've got to change that dynamic, and we will when I'm president. Hi. Good morning.
Many elephants in the room right now, I think, and you've touched on debt and deficit, but drugs is another D. And could you tell us, when you'll have the bully pulpit, what you might do regarding drugs in this country?
Are you talking pharmaceuticals or drug abuse?
I'm talking drug use.
Drug use.
Well, pharmaceuticals could be touched on too.
Yeah, well, let me touch on both of them. On the pharmaceutical side, look, part of it, and I've said this before, you got companies that figure out, we got the only drug that can do this, we're going to charge whatever we want. Okay, if you have that one scumbag guy who decided he was going to jack up the price of this drug, he could. And that happens, and that's going on. And you know the best cure for that is to make sure there isn't just one drug, to make sure there's 5 that can do that. And today, let me just, for example, generics, we should have more generics in our market. You know why we don't? Because it takes 58 months to bring a generic to market, even if it's been widely used. It takes 58 months and millions of dollars for a company to bring a generic to market. So since it's off patent, and you can no longer make a lot of money off it, they decide it's not worth it. And so you just don't have enough generic. It also takes long to bring a drug to market, period. I'm not saying the FDA shouldn't be safe. It should be safe. But the harder and more costly you make it to bring a drug to market, the less likely you're going to get them. So we have drugs, for example, that have been widely used in Europe for decades that you cannot sell in the U.S. because the FDA says there have been no clinical trials on humans. And I say, yes, there has. It's called Europe. Huh? They've been using it for 30 years. So we've got to expedite that process. The hepatitis C was a death sentence up until about 5 years ago when they invented a cure for hepatitis C. When that cure came out, there was only one drug and the price was astronomical. You know when the price came down rapidly? When a second drug entered the marketplace. Now they're on the way to 3 drugs. So we have to make it easier to bring competition. On drug abuse, let me tell you, I've told this to people, and a lot of people say, you're a young guy, you're younger than other candidates. Why aren't you in favor of legalizing marijuana? And I say, well, because this country already pays a terrible price for the abuse of alcohol. We're not going to outlaw alcohol. We're not going to ban it. It's part of our culture. It's ingrained in our society. You know, that's not a realistic proposal. But no one can tell me that alcohol's had a positive impact on society. It destroys marriages and lives. It kills people. People get drunk and they get behind the wheel of a car and they wipe out entire families. And now you want to add another intoxicant and make it legal? And let me tell you why that's problematic. Maybe it's because I have 4 kids. But I can't, how am I going to tell my kids now, don't smoke pot? And they'll say, why? It's legal. It can't be that bad if it's legal. Yes, it is, especially for a developing mind. I can tell you it's not good for you. It's not like broccoli. There's no positive impact to its use. Okay? There's no positive impact to using marijuana. Now, if there's a medicinal use, if you can go to the FDA and prove that it helps with medicine, that's fine. Then turn it into medicine. But I'm not in favor of legalizing this. And the third thing that I would say is, where are the drugs coming from? Look, we just left spending a lot of time in New Hampshire. There's a huge heroin epidemic in New Hampshire. And it's coming from 2 places. Number one, it's just people that are falling into heroin. And the other is people that are falling into drug addiction through prescription drug use. You hurt your back at work, they give you Vicodin or some other opiate. You use it because your doctor gave it to you. It must be safe. and then you become physically dependent. And then you try to get off it, or they force you to get off it, and you go through withdrawal, and withdrawal is very painful, and the only thing that can deal with withdrawal is to use another opiate, and it's heroin. But the heroin you're using is mixed with all kinds of things, and one day you use too much of it, and you overdose, and you die. It's a terrible story, and it's happening all over this country. Number one, we need to make people more aware of what an opiate is. Number two is we need to push on the pharmaceutical industry to develop better pain drugs that don't have the dependence level. Number three, we need to treat people who have addiction as people who have a disease. Addiction is a disease. It is a disease that alters the brain chemistry, is a disease that and it has to be dealt with medically. Only medical treatment will get you off that. And number four, we've got to keep those drugs from coming in here to begin with, which is why securing the border is not just about immigration. El Chapo and all these Mexican drug gangs, they are targeting specific communities in this country. They already have market share in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, the big cities. They already have that. They were looking to expand into smaller towns. You know why they target smaller towns, especially in the Northeast? Because they have smaller police departments. They don't have task force there. They know they can get around them, and people are dying, and lives are being destroyed. So I think we have to deal with it in a multifaceted way, especially on the opiate side. But the last thing you need is a president going around saying, hey, I would not do it, but you want to legalize a drug, it's fine with me. You're sending a terrible message. There is no responsible way to use cocaine, and there is no responsible way to smoke marijuana repeatedly. There's nothing good about it. There isn't. If there's a medicinal use, go through the FDA process. But other than that, I am not in favor of legalizing drugs. I am in favor of securing the border to keep out illegal immigration and drugs. And I am in favor of doing more and providing more resources to people who have a dependence so they can become free of that dependence and go on about their lives. I don't want to see us locking people up in jail because they're dependent. You're not going to get treatment in jail. I want us to treat people who are dependent as victims of a disease who we're going to treat and cure.
So this is the second to last question.
Yes, Senator, number one, thank you for giving us the privilege of coming and hearing you speak. I came here today, I basically came here today supporting another candidate. You maybe have changed my mind, but there's one thing that is very, very important to me, and I believe is very important to all of Americans. Illegal immigration into this country has cheapened American citizenship, and it should not be a cheapened thing. We are indeed a nation of immigrants. All of us, at one point or another, our forefathers came from somewhere else, and that's a good thing, but they came here legally. We keep hearing this number of about 11 million illegal immigrants in this country, and I believe that is a very, very false figure. We are one of only 2 countries in the world that still have birthright citizenship, I should say developed countries, America and Canada. The rest of Europe and most of the rest of the world has eliminated that. It is a magnet for people to come here illegally, have children, have the anchor babies, etc., and allow them to stay and then bring their families with them. So the question that I have for you is, what can we do and what can you do as president, not only to end illegal immigration, to close the border, which much more, as you've said, drugs are coming across the border, terrorists are coming across the border, terrible things. But what can you do, or do you propose to do, to prevent the people that are here illegally from being allowed to be on the public dole? I think one of the things that would eliminate this, or help to eliminate it, would be just saying, okay, you're here, we're not going to put you on a bus and send you back, but you cannot have any more of our programs, our welfare programs, our food stamps, anything else. If you're going to be here, you're going to make it on your own in this country, but we're not going to help you because you broke the law coming here in the first place. Thank you.
Well, it's a great question. Let me preface it all by saying that this is an issue I understand better than anyone running because I've lived it. My parents were immigrants, and my grandparents, my wife's entire family are immigrants. It goes deeper than that. I grew up in a community of immigrants. I still live in one. Literally every one of my neighbors is either an immigrant or a first-generation American. So I understand this issue personally. I've seen every aspect of it. You talk about birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, the abuses of it, is largely a phenomenon of wealthy people coming from abroad. I'll tell you the typical story. Okay? A very wealthy person from South America will fly into the United States on a visa, 8.5 months pregnant, on a 90-day tourist visa. Well, if you're 8.5 months pregnant and you stay in the U.S. for 90 days, guess what's going to happen during those 90 days? You're going to have a child. This is a very typical story. They will have that child, maybe at Jackson Memorial Hospital, which is our safety net hospital, or maybe one of the other hospitals. They have to be treated. You show up in labor at a hospital, they have to deliver the child. No one here is saying they wouldn't. And then they're going to bill you. Very wealthy people with a private jet. It is not atypical for someone who comes from abroad to have a child in the hospital, American citizenship, and then fly back on the private jet and never pay the bill. It happens all the time. It happens too often. And it's not just in Florida, it happens in California with people from China, it happens from people all over the world. It is largely a phenomenon. Does that mean that someone who's here to work and support doesn't happen? Yes, but it's very rare. The likeliest scenario you see is someone that's abusing it. And I would like to see us deal with that. And one of the best ways to deal with that is to change our visa programs. If there are any indicators that you are coming to the U.S. to give birth to a child to gain U.S. citizenship, that should be part of the process of screening out. We have to be tougher in how we allow people into this country on visitors' visas and temporary visas, because that problem is being abused. But here's the other part. You are right, we are a nation of immigrants. But we have always changed our policies to reflect the times in which we live. Okay? They've always, you changed your life to adapt to the times in which we live. So it was not unusual in America, not long ago, in many communities, no one locked their doors. People didn't lock their doors. Why? What's going to happen? I think everyone locks their doors. Because all you got to do is turn on the news to see what could happen if you don't lock the door. There was a time where if someone knocked on your door, you were going to open it. It was the polite thing to do. Nowadays, it's hard to get me to open the door because I have no idea who you are. You say that you're there to sell or whatever, but I don't know that. Maybe you're one of those people that breaks into a home and ties up the family and tries to steal everything. So why do we lock our doors now in America? Is it because we hate people outside of our home? No. It's because we love the people inside of our home. So we've changed the way we live because the world has changed. Immigration has to change because the world has changed. For starters, today we have to be stricter than ever. When I'm president, our visa programs are going to be different. If we don't know who you are, and I mean really know who you are, you can't come in. You can't come in to go to Disney World. You can't come in to go to school. We really have to know who you are and why you are coming. Because there are terrorist groups that are trying to get people in America posing as students, as doctors, as tourists. We can't risk it. This whole debate about Syrian refugees. I live in a community of refugees. But the refugee problem has changed. We have an issue now. People coming from Syria, a place where passports are very easy to alter. You can allow 10,000 refugees in, and 9,999 of them are fine. And one of them is an ISIS killer. You made a big mistake. So we got to be 100% right. That means we have to be 100% strict. So number one, we have to change the criteria for allowing people into this country. If we don't know who you are and we don't know why you're coming, 100% for sure, you are not getting into the United States when I'm president. Number two is we have to secure our border. And our border is not just the border with Mexico, it's also the airport and the seaports and everything else. How do you do that? A number of things. Number one, we need more border agents. We don't have enough border agents. We just don't. And so I think we need to hire anywhere between 15,000 and 20,000 additional border agents. And I've proposed that in the past. We need more border agents. By the way, more border agents isn't just about immigration. It's about the Zika virus. One of the things we need to do to prevent the entry of these things is to have more people screening people as they enter to see, is this a person who potentially, when we had the Ebola scare, now it's the Zika virus. So you need more border agents. You need to finish 700 miles of walls and fencing on the southern border. That's important. Because, let me tell you why walls and especially walls and fencing are important. Because what it does is it funnels the traffic. It's not that you're going to seal the entire border. It's that now people cannot cross in certain places. If you want to cross, it forces everyone to cross in certain places that we monitor. That's the reason why walls work, because they force people to do the trafficking, to traffic and enter the country through the areas that we can monitor as opposed to areas we cannot monitor. The third thing is you need mandatory e-verify. And that means require every business in America to run the names of everyone they're hiring through a system so that if you hire someone who's illegally here, the fines are going to be crippling. If you do it 2 or 3 times, we're going to close you down forever. And that will stop people from coming. Once they realize you can't come to America illegally and easily find a job, they're not going to come as often. They're just not going to do it. And the fourth is you need an entry-exit tracking system for visa. Why? Because someone entered the U.S. now on a tourist visa. I'm here to go to Disney, and then we're going to go to Cape Canaveral, and then we're going to go up to Charleston, and then we're going to go to New York City, and we're going to be here for 80 days. All right, welcome to America, we log you in. And then, whether you left or not, we don't know. But we don't log you out. We have no idea if you left or didn't leave. So we have no idea how many people are here illegally that overstayed visas, but we think it's close to half the people that are here illegally. And we get fought on that. You know, the airlines don't like it, the cruise ships don't like it. Too bad. We have to have an entry-exit tracking system. You put those things in place, illegal immigration will drop dramatically. And then look, we have a lot of, I don't know what the number is, they say 11 million. We have a lot of people in this country illegally here. I don't think the American people are saying we got to round up every single person and deport them. But you're also not going to go around handing out citizenship cards. You've been here for a long time, here's your citizenship. That's absurd. We're not going to do that either. I think people will be reasonable but responsible how to deal with that. But it's got to be something the American people support. It can't be something we ram down their throat and say this is the way it's going to be. Here's the thing, we're not doing anything until we prove to you that illegal immigration is finally under control. We're not going to do anything until the wall is actually built. We're not going to do anything until we hire the border agents. We're not going to do anything until E-Verify and the entry-exit tracking system is in place. After all of that is in place and all of that is working, and you actually believe and can see with your own eyes that illegal immigration is under control, then we'll see what the American people are willing to do with someone who's been here for 15 years, who's not a criminal, who learned English, who paid a fine, who's paying taxes, and all they want is a work permit. We'll see what you'll support. We're not going to ram it down your throat. But we can't even get to that part of it until we do everything else. Because here's what happens if you do it the other way around. What happened last year with the migratory crisis. When the president legalized young people in America, the word got out. And I know this because I live in a community where people came this way. There were trafficking gangs that went around in Honduras telling people, Barack Obama just passed a law that said if you are a child, you can come to America illegally. Now, technically, that's not what he did. But in reality, that's what people believed. And guess what they did? By the thousands, they sent their children by themselves to the United States to cross the border by the thousands. By the thousands. And let me just tell you, who is that good for? It isn't good for America, but is it good for these kids? To be in the hands of these trafficking networks that do unspeakable things to these children sometimes? You know, there are kids that are sent here that way that never show up at the border. They never make it. What happened to them? We don't know. They could have been sold off into sex slavery or labor trafficking. Horrible things happen. I don't know if there's any children here because I usually leave this part out. Does anybody have a child there before I tell you this true story? You know that when women are signed up for these trafficking networks to come across, it is almost one of the things they do is they inject them they take a injectable contraceptive. Do you know why that's like a standard practice when women cross alone? Because they expect to be raped. That's how horrible this is. This is not good for anyone. And by allowing the border to be open that way, and by we're creating a magnet that leads to this terrible human tragedy. Not to mention that America, no country in the world can accept unlimited, uncontrolled immigration. No nation can accept that, especially now in this environment. So this is an issue we will deal with. And for me, I understand it personally, because all these things I just told you aren't because I read about them in a report. I know people that have gone through this. I know people who saw those flyers in Honduras. I know people that are here that came to have children here illegally. My brother-in-law is a firefighter, has delivered children on the highway from people that are here from other countries who are not poor. I know people that are here in this. You talked about federal benefits. You don't qualify for federal benefits if you're here illegally, but you do get benefits for your children. So that's meant. Some states do get federal benefits, and sanctuary cities are creating sanctuaries for people that come here illegally and bragging about it. They should lose all their federal funding. They will when they're president. So I'll close by saying on that question, we will deal with it. I know this issue personally. No one can spin me on this issue because I know every aspect of it. I think it's real different when you know something personally because you've seen it with your own eyes. We'll deal with it because what we have now is bad for everyone. It's bad for the people that are coming here illegally. It's bad for America. It's bad for our communities. And it violates the rule of law and creates a chaotic and basically anarchy that we can't afford as a country. And it's too dangerous given this environment. Oh, yeah, they didn't get a question up here. We'll do one more. Okay, yes, sir.
morning, Senator. It's great to be with you. I've watched every Republican debate, and I believe there have only been two questions in all of the debates about Obamacare.
About?
Obamacare.
Right.
Every candidate has said they've eliminated Obamacare, but I don't hear any specifics about what they would replace it with. Could you tell us specifically how you would replace it with?
Well, first of all, I'm the only one that's actually done anything about Obamacare, and it wasn't a long speech on the floor of the Senate. It was actually a law that got rid of the bailout fund. When they passed Obamacare, they created a bailout. They were going to bail out private insurance companies with your taxpayer money if those companies lost money on Obamacare. And we passed. I led the effort, and we got rid of the bailout fund. And I did it because I know how to work this process. I know how to get things done through the legislative process. So I didn't hold a press conference. I didn't brag about it ahead of time. I didn't create a lot of noise. I didn't send out fundraising emails ahead of time to make it a big production. I just worked the process until we got it done. And then I told everybody about it. But beforehand, I got it done. And so I'm the only one that ever has. We will repeal Obamacare. Here's what we're going to replace it with. A system that puts everybody in charge of their own health care spending. So you're going to get most Americans are going to get their health care from one of three places under my new system. Number one, your employer will provide it like they do now, but in a competitive marketplace, where they're going to be able to buy that health insurance from any company in any state in America they want to buy it from. Number two, your employer is going to say, we don't offer health insurance, we offer a health care benefit. We are going to give you $1,000 a month, tax-free. It's not treated as income. And you can use that $1,000 a month to pay for health insurance or health care any way you want. Or you're going to get, if you don't have that, then you'll have a refundable tax credit, which means you have to be working. But you will have a refundable tax credit that gives you every month money that you can use to spend on health care. And what does that mean now that you control money for health care? It means it depends on who you are. If you're my brother-in-law, who's 29, single, healthy, and thinks he's never going to die, the way he's probably going to use that money is he's going to put it in a health savings account. He can't spend it on anything else. And then he's going to take a piece of it and buy a catastrophic hospitalization plan. So when he gets the flu, when he sprains his ankle, he goes to the urgent care center, he pays with his credit card, and then he reimburses himself from the health savings account. And that money stays in there and rolls over every year. And then he has a catastrophic hospitalization plan. So God forbid he gets really sick or gets hit by a bus, God forbid. He got to be in the hospital, that plan kicks in. Catastrophic hospitalization for a 29-year-old single healthy male is very affordable. And so that's, for someone like me, a father of 4 and a family of 6, I probably need more comprehensive coverage. But I would be able to buy it from any insurance company in America. That means I live in Florida, but there's an insurance company in South Carolina, and they have a great plan, and I'm going to sign up and pay for that. Why does that matter? Because now you have hundreds of companies competing for my business. And what happens when hundreds of companies are fighting for my business? Well, turn on the television. You'll see what's happening. When you turn on the TV here in South Carolina, every ad will either be for somebody running for president or for Geico, State Farm, Allstate, Prudential, Liberty Mutual, Progressive. Why are they advertising? Because who controls your auto insurance money? You do. And why they're fighting with each other for you to hire them, for you to buy them. And how do they argue with each other? What do they promise you? Lower price and more coverage. We need that in health coverage. Now, there are people that are chronically ill. You have a serious illness, it's long-standing, it's pre-existing, and no insurance company will touch you. That's where government should focus on. There's where you have a high-risk pool that insures people under those circumstances. And that's good for everybody, because the sick people get their coverage, but now they're no longer part of the broader network, meaning prices come down for everybody else. This is a much better approach than what Obamacare has done. What Obamacare has basically done is it's told everybody, this is the insurance you have to buy. It has to cover these things, even things you don't want. Everybody has to have it. Number 2, you can only buy it from these handful of companies. And number 3, these handful of companies are saying, fine, you're making us cover a lot of people, some of whom, are very sick, have never had insurance before. The only way we're going to be able to pay for this is, number 1, through the bailout fund, which we got rid of. Number 2 is we're going to have high co-payments and high deductibles. So, yeah, you have Obamacare, but you have a $5,000 deductible. So most people aren't going to have $5,000 laying around, so they're uninsured, basically. Or number 3, the other thing they do is, since we are losing money on our Obamacare plans, where are they making it up? On the non-Obamacare plans. So they're insurance companies, you're Blue Cross Blue Shield, I'm losing money on Obamacare, I got to make it up somewhere else, I'm raising premiums on everybody else. And that's everybody else getting higher premiums. And what it's doing to health care quality is terrible. Because the other thing they do in order to save money is they narrow the networks. They have less doctors and less hospitals that they're forcing you to. And the practical implication of that is you need to go see a gynecological oncologist. There's only one on the plan. He or she is 90 miles away, and since they're the only one on the plan, everybody else is lining up to see them as well. And they'll see you. They accept your insurance, and we'll see you in 7 months. Well, if you have cancer, 7 months is a long time to wait to see an oncologist. Or yes, we have hospitals in our plan. We have 2 hospitals, and they're not the ones you want to go to. And so my point is, this is bad for everyone. It's a true disaster. We're going to repeal it and replace it with a system that I outlined.
Thank you, Senator. Just wanted to start with a couple comments and then a question. Since the last debate, I started looking up the term leadership and what that is, because I think you came under attack unfairly for that. Leadership entails 3 things: a clear vision, people to follow that vision, and in a time of crisis, being able to come up with solutions to fix the problems. I didn't come here today to have you win me over. I'm 100% for Marco Rubio, and I hope everybody in this room is as far as the robot stuff, and you haven't brought that up, but let's keep in mind that the Terminator was elected twice in California. And my real question is, I haven't heard a lot about it, and I talked about to my company about some challenges that are out there. And one that's very concerning to me is the Department of Labor trying to change the rule of an exempt status. I want to get your opinion on that and what we can do. Well, the pay that would have to be to kick in for exempt status, I believe it would make the entry-level pay raised to roughly $50,000, which would force most entry-level managers or mid-level managers back to an hourly rate, which would probably do harm for companies trying to be able to fill those roles and the people in those roles to be able to take care of their families.
Well, let me just tell you about the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor today is run by someone that I fought really hard to keep off being appointed and being nominated and being confirmed, Tom Perez. And he basically is a representative of labor unions, masking and masquerading as the head of the Department of Labor. And you cannot have an anti-business person in the Department of Labor. I actually think the Department of Labor is one of those agencies that's grown too powerful, too large, whose very existence I think is quite questionable to begin with. It's an anti-business agency. It's designed to basically, at least it operates today in a way that basically is designed to oppress and persecute and sometimes prosecute the private sector. And I think those rules that you've talked about are an example of that. Look, my parents were hourly wage workers their whole lives. My father was primarily a bartender. My mother was a maid and a stock clerk at Kmart and a cashier at a coffee shop, and she built aluminum chairs at a factory. They worked for hourly wages. And the reason my parents were able to find jobs that paid enough to live off of was because someone who had access to money risked that money to open up a hotel and to hire people to work at that hotel. And the Department of Labor is discouraging people from doing that. In fact, you joke about robots. Let me tell you what all these rules are going to do. They're going to accelerate the pace of automation. Now, maybe you can't do that in a management position, but maybe you can. The more expensive you make people, the faster they're going to move to a machine or outsourcing. It's just going to happen. If you make people more expensive, you're going to look for an alternative to people to do that work. Or you're going to look for another country where you can send the work to. And that's happening a lot as well. So the Department of Labor today under Tom Perez is perhaps the worst it has ever been, certainly in my lifetime, and going after business. And these exempt rules are just an example of it. It is a problem, and it is a solution in search of a problem. In essence, they can't describe to you what it is the problem they're trying to fix, but they're sure there's one. It all goes back to the same thing I said about an hour ago. This is not an accident. This is part of a systematic effort to redefine what government does in our country. They want our government to run the economy. Okay, Barack Obama and his Democratic Party want the government to run the economy. And that's why they stick their hands into the most sensitive parts of the economy, your health care coverage, our schools through Common Core, how much we pay people through the Department of Labor, how we classify our employees through the Department of Labor. This is an orchestrated effort to put our government in charge of our economy. And if we lose this election, one of these things will become permanent. And it will change the nature of our country, it will change the nature of our economy, and it will lead to our decline as a people and as a nation. And I'm glad that's the first time anyone has raised that issue in any of the town halls we've done. We're going to talk more about the Department of Labor, not just under Tom Perez, but after Barack Obama, because what they're doing is being done on purpose. He wants to be my vice president. This will be our last question, because I got to meet up with my family, and I want to stay as long as we can to greet as many of you as possible. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning to
Good
you.
morning.
It is a pleasure to have you here among us in Sun City.
It's
My
my honor.
question is one that I have not heard in most of the debates that I've watched, and that pertains to the IRS, which affects every one of us. How would you reform a very corrupt IRS?
Well, remember what I just said at the debate a bunch of times, I'm going to have to say it again. A lot of what's happening at the IRS is not an accident. It is being used as a political weapon. When the IRS decided a few years ago, we're going to start targeting conservative groups. We're going to start targeting groups that have conservative political views. Do you think that just happened because it just happened? No. People take direction from the top down. The president sets the tone. The president sets the tone. Government should control everything. You're willing to use every arm of government to go after your political opponents. And so that's what's happened with the IRS. Political targeting in the IRS is real. And then you have an attorney general that won't do anything about it because the Department of Justice has become a political tool as well. So Hillary Clinton puts sensitive and classified information in our email server, nothing will probably happen. David Petraeus does the same thing. He gets charged with a crime, has to plead guilty. Now they're threatening to strip him of his stars as a general. Totally different. It's a political weapon. Fast and Furious. People forget about Fast and Furious. People died because of that. Who's been held accountable? Who's been fired? Who's been prosecuted? Who's been charged with the fact that under this Justice Department we gave high-caliber weapons, true weapons of war, to drug traffickers, who then use those weapons against Americans serving our country and kill them? No one has been held accountable. They will when I'm president. We're not forgetting about that. Back to the IRS. The best way to limit the IRS's power is to simplify the tax code. Now look, there's a candidate running that says he's going to eliminate the IRS. That's not true. I mean, you may rename it, but if Ted Cruz's tax plan has a VAT tax, which is what they have in Europe. VAT tax means a tax on both businesses now have to pay taxes on the money they make, but they also have to pay taxes on the money that they pay their employees. And Reagan hated the VAT tax. He absolutely despised the VAT tax because it is a sneaky tax. Right now, if you work every month or every week or every 2 weeks when you get your paycheck, you see on the stub it says government took out this amount of money. Under the VAT tax, the money's still being taken out, but you don't see it because your employer's paying it all. But how are they going to pay that tax? Where are they going to get the money to pay the tax on your behalf? By cutting your pay and raising their prices. So it doesn't show up in paper anywhere. So it's a very easy tax to raise. And so you create a VAT tax, and in the future, you're going to have a liberal president or a liberal Congress, God forbid, and they've got a new tax they can raise. So someone still has to collect that tax. And it's going to be, whether you call it the IRS or you call it something else, you'll have to have an agency that collects it. What's the best way to limit the power of the IRS? To simplify the tax code and get rid of Obamacare. You know who enforces Obamacare in America? The IRS. They are the enforcers. That's why they think they need to hire 15 or 20,000 new IRS agents. Instead, we're going to hire 20,000 new border agents. My tax plan for Americans is going to be very simple. We're going to get rid of all of these deductions that largely benefit the wealthier, to be honest with you, because they're the ones that can hire accountants and people, especially big businesses. We're going to have a large standard deduction for all Americans. Instead of having to go through all this complicated stuff, it'll be even better for working class and middle class Americans. It's much simpler to fill out. We're going to have a flat tax rate on business, 25%. Right now it's 35%. Instead of 7 tax brackets, we're only going to have 3. 90-something% of Americans will be significant reductions based on my tax plan. In fact, a family raising 2 children will see on average a $5,000 tax reduction in their taxes under my plan, and they will be able to fill it out in half the time. So the accountants, probably not so good, right? They can be auditors. But the IRS will be less powerful because there's less interpretation to do. Same on the business tax. What's the power of the IRS? Why do they have thousands of employees? Because they spend all day arguing with businesses about whether or not this deduction is appropriate. We're not going to have that. We're just going to have a lower and flat tax rate on business income. And you know who that really helps? The small business. I know many of you are or have been in business. The majority of American businesses are not what they call C corporations. They're pass-throughs, they're S corporations, they're a partnership, an LLC, or just a standard S. You pay your taxes based on your personal rate. So you can be paying as high as 39.5%. When you factor in local taxes, it's up 45, 50%. Meanwhile, a C corporation organized in Delaware with great lawyers paying 0, 5, 7, because they can hire people to deal with all these deduction stuff, but the small business cannot. Under my plan, everybody pays a flat rate of 25. It won't take very long, and you'll be able to immediately deduct every penny you invest in your business. And that's important, because a small business cannot afford to wait 7 years to take the deduction off a new piece of equipment that they bought. And why do we want people investing? Because that's what creates jobs. That's what creates jobs. Simplifying the tax code will take power away from the IRS. Having an attorney general that holds people accountable will punish people for using the IRS as a weapon. And you're going to have a president that's going to make it very clear to the IRS. We're not going to be using the IRS to go after liberal groups. We're not going to be using the IRS to go after conservative groups. We're not going to use any government agency to go after Americans unfairly or unconstitutionally. And if we catch you doing it, we will fire you and we will prosecute you. Well, I've really enjoyed my time here today. I thank you for listening to me. I want to close the way I began by asking you for your vote. I know this race is now narrowed. We have 5 or 6 people still in the race. They're all going to be asking for your vote. And in the end, they're all good and interesting people. I ask you to vote for me for 3 reasons. Number one, I'm as conservative as anyone in this race. I hold my record up to anybody, and it's not just my record in Washington. I served for 8.5 years in the Florida legislature, the 3rd largest state in the country. I was the Speaker of the House those last 2 years, which means I didn't just run the House, which had hundreds of employees, but I was responsible for balancing not 1, but 2 budgets in Florida without raising a penny in taxes. Even before that, the other night there was a little bit of a debate over eminent domain. Florida has the best eminent domain laws in the country, meaning in Florida, a city cannot take away your private property and give it to a developer. And you know why? Because of a law that I passed, a law that I wrote and passed, and we put in the Constitution thanks to the voters of Florida. So I hold up my conservative record in my time in Tallahassee and in my time in D.C. I encourage you to go on the website of every leading conservative group in America, and you will find that my rankings are near the top in terms of people there. I am as conservative as anyone in this race, but I'm a conservative that can unify this party, because I understand that not everyone agrees with me on 100% of the issues. You don't have to. We agree on most of the issues, and we all agree that what we're doing now is bad for this country. If we don't come together quickly, we can't win. If we are still fighting with each other in August and September and October, we won't win. And the other side knows that. And they are dying for us to nominate someone that can't unify us. But it won't be enough to just unify us. The third thing I will do is I'll grow our movement. I will take our conservative principles to people who live the way I grew up. Quite frankly, to people that haven't voted for a Republican in a long time. Because they've been told by the media and by the left that Republicans only care about rich people. We don't care about people living paycheck to paycheck. I care about people living paycheck to paycheck, because that's how I grew up. They've been told Republicans don't care about young people. I care about young people and the issues they face, because my oldest daughter is going to turn 16 in April and will soon be going to college, because my 3 other kids aren't far behind, because I have student loan debt, because it wasn't that long ago that I paid $1,500 a month for rent and $1,200 a month for student loans, and Jeanette and I every month just waited until that last Friday of the month in the hopes that the paycheck got into the account before the check got to the bank. I know what that feels like. And I think it's important for us to convince people facing those circumstances that what we offer is better than what the other side offers. We will unite this movement, we will unite the party, and we will grow it. And the final thing is, I'll keep you safe. You have reason to be worried and scared about the state of the world, because it's more dangerous today than it has been probably in 100 years. A lunatic in North Korea has nuclear weapons. The Chinese are not just growing their military, they steal our inventions, they hack into our computers, they practice blowing up our satellites, and they're taking over the most important shipping lane in the world. Vladimir Putin is creating all sorts of instability in Europe and in the Middle East, while NATO is in decline. Iran is about to get $100 billion of sanctions relief, which they're not going to use to open up orphanages and schools. They're going to use to build up their military and one day build their own nuclear weapon. And ISIS is the most dangerous, well-funded, radical jihadist group in the history of mankind. And in the face of all these threats, we are weakening our military. There is no one running for president on the Republican side that understands these issues better than I do. These issues have developed over the last 5 years, and I've been involved in it. I encourage you to look at my record. Before what happened in Syria happened, before ISIS happened, I warned about an ISIS-like group in 2012. Before what happened in Libya, which has now become the new operational space for ISIS, happened, I warned about Libya in 2011. In 2014, early 15, when ISIS crossed over from Iraq and from Syria into Iraq, and President Obama called them the JV team, I warned they were not a JV team, and they needed to be eliminated quickly or they would grow the way they've grown. Before Vladimir Putin conducted airstrikes, in fact, 2 weeks to the day before he conducted those airstrikes, on a national debate stage, I said very clearly, Vladimir Putin is going to start carrying out airstrikes. And everybody said, you don't know what you're talking about. 14 days later, he carried out their first airstrikes. No one running for president understands these issues better than I do. There are people running for president that have lived longer than I have. No doubt about it. Even Ted Cruz has lived 5 months longer than I have. But none of them understand the issues we face today better than I do. No one understands the issues we face today on national security better than I do. And I will keep this country safe. Because in the end, what we are trying to keep safe is not just the nation I grew up in. It's the nation that changed the history of my family. And it's the nation that my 4 children are going to get to grow up in and ultimately become adults in and raise their own families in. I think about that every day. I'm not saying the other candidates don't care about the future of America. I'm telling you that the future of America to me is personal. The future of America for me is named Amanda and Daniella and Anthony and Dominick, my 4 kids. And every single day that I'm in that office, I'm going to do everything I can to make the nation they inherit more prosperous and safer than it's ever been. And it's not just for my kids. It's for your kids and your children and your grandchildren. They deserve to inherit what we did, the greatest nation in the history of the world. And if I'm our president, they will. So thank you for the chance to talk.